Good morning. Happy Tuesday to you. I hope that you are doing well, that your week is looking good. Welcome to our Tuesday Tea-ology. I have today an English breakfast tea, which is a little bit not very specific when you think about it. It's very good, but I often have a Yorkshire or Yorkshire Gold. So I guess this is from anywhere else besides Yorkshire. The two varieties of English tea, apparently. Yorkshire and non-Yorkshire. So here we are, non-Yorkshire English breakfast tea. And we are continuing to talk theologically about the holiness of God. That is the first in our attributes of God as we are breaking them down, and once again following a kind of breakdown to talk about the natural and then the moral attributes of God, or you might say the attributes of God's greatness and then of his goodness. Although none of these frameworks is perfect, God is great in all the ways he is good. God is good in everything that is great about him. All of God's attributes are natural to him, and can you really say that any of them are without moral standing? And holiness bridges the two. Is it an attribute of greatness or of goodness? Well, both. Is it a natural attribute or a moral attribute? Really, both. And I put it at the head because of that it's hard to describe what holiness is, apart from saying it's like an adjective of divinity. It's like an adjectival form of saying concerning God, the things of God are holy. God is supremely holy. Anything else that is holy by relationship to God, by God making it holy, by taking it unto himself. And so this idea of separation lies at the center of the concept of holiness. What is holy is what is separated from the world and to God. And that's because there is a fundamental separation of nature. In all the things that exist, there's two categories of things that exist. Yes, only two. Tea is not its own category. There's God, and there's everything that's not God. God, uncreated and supreme and infinite, everything that's not God, created and within God's power, having its existence from God rather than from itself. And so God is holy, is separate, simply by nature of being the creator. And yet he separates things unto himself. And now I'm not saying he makes things God, but he makes them belonging to God. He makes things to be God's property, God's special and set apart things. Everything is God's property, but nonetheless, he sets apart people and sometimes objects or time or things like that, specially set aside to his particular purposes. And that's what lies at the heart of this concept of holiness. And I want to continue to break that down today into how that how that plays out in God's relationship with people. Because of course that's where we see God's holiness. You might say we would know God is holy if God was wholly absent, uh, in that he would be completely separated. But that is not how God fundamentally reveals his holiness. God reveals his holiness as a separation that is present, as a transcendence that is near and imminent. Let me see if I can unfold what I mean. For holiness is is particularly an attribute of God's transcendence, his beyondness, his infinite difference from everything. And that's why it has these connotations of beauty and glory and purity and righteousness. And yet, the holy God comes near, and that is where we experience this separation. So when you come to Exodus chapter 3, and God is revealing himself to Moses in the wilderness, the incident of the burning bush, and Moses sees this bush burning but not being consumed, and so he appears to observe this strange thing, and God speaks to him. Exodus chapter 3, verse 4. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he said, Here I am. So God has summoned him. God has drawn him to himself. And now verse 5. Then he said, that is God, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. So do you see how God drew near to Moses? God drew Moses aside to come to him. And yet, when Moses came, then God said, Stop, do not draw near. Take off your sandals in this sign of respect. Where you stand is holy ground. And so the ground in that area, it's not that God found a plot of ground that happened to be holy ground. No, it's God's special presence that he communicated there that made it holy ground. The ground was holy because that was the ground where God was manifesting himself in a particular way. God is everywhere, but nonetheless, he can set aside a place as holy. So things can be holy. They're not holy because they are God or part of God. They're holy because they've been set apart by God for his purpose. That's good stuff. And that holiness calls for respect. It's not that something is worshipped because it's holy. The holy God is worshipped. But things that are associated with him have an associated respect. And so Moses is said to take off his sandals, to show particular care and respect because he is in the presence of the holy God, and therefore the place where he is standing is holy. And we'll get into, I think, next time more about this designation of things and particularly of people as holy. But I just want to tease out some of this separation and closeness. Because that is where we really begin to see how holiness works into redemption. For sin has made us unholy, not just not holy in some kind of neutral sense, but positively unholy. Sin is, of course, at its core to go against God. And so if God is supremely holy, then sin and sinners are unholy, are the opposite of holy, are corrupt and defiled. And so there is a tension, a powerful tension, because God's consuming holiness is over here, and our unholiness, which calls out for wrath, is over here. And yet God does not just manifest his holiness in opposition, but God manifests his holiness in his work of redemption, in his redemptive mission to come down and to draw fallen mankind to himself, and to take what was corrupted and sanctify and renew and restore his creation. So when you come to the story of Israel further, I mean, holiness is a key concept as Israel is drawn out from slavery in Egypt and brought to be God's people, and there's a whole lot of holiness language and what's designated as holy. And at the at the center, some of the key, most significant features, of course, are that the tabernacle is holy. The tabernacle and later the temple that would follow from it. So God in his holiness, as he drew a people to himself and redeemed them for himself, as he established a holy meeting place with Moses here, he further established a holy dwelling place in the midst of the people. So when he told them to build this tabernacle, and later when they were in the land, they would build the temple, it was in the center of the camp, and it had layers, as it were, and it had an inner part that was the holy place. And because it was the holy place, you couldn't just go there for fun or as a tourist or something like that. Only the priests could go there as they went about their duties of directing the worship and doing the things that symbolize the fellowship of God with his people and of the people's response and loyalty to God. And inside the holy place was what? Was the most holy place, or the holy of holies. And so you see how that repetition is meant to say this is the holiest. And it was so holy that no one could go there except for the high priest on the Day of Atonement. And when he was making that certain sacrificial offering from the Day of Atonement, then he was to go in. And so people, under certain conditions, were invited into the holy place of God. And God established this. You see, if this seems restrictive to you, you got to take that and flip it on its head. This is all God's establishment. God doesn't have to establish a distance between himself and us. That distance is there because of sin. God, in his supremely loving and holy initiative, establishes a nearness with us, bridges the distance. And so the tabernacle reminds us that in the work of redemption, in the redemptive mission, that God is the holy God, and as the holy God, he has come to dwell among his people and to bridge that gap and make them able to have renewed fellowship with him. And so, one interesting phrase we read in the Bible, for example, in Hosea chapter 11, verse 9, God is speaking through the prophet this prophetic word and says, "For I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst." The Holy One in your midst. And you have to stop and think about what a remarkable phrase that is. Because what seems natural to the Holy One is that he would be distant from them. But he is the Holy One in the midst of his people, the Holy One among you. And so God in his holiness, while this is an attribute of distance and of transcendence and of the distinction of God, as it plays out in redemption, it is a distance in nearness, a distinction that is bridged by God's sovereign initiative, an invitation to the unholy to be reconciled with the Holy One. And so God says to Israel, "I am the Holy One among you." And we may, for just a moment, run ahead to the New Testament and remember that some of the earliest things about Jesus that are spoken where the child will be called holy. That the demon recognized him as the Holy One of God. These designations, whether from whether from angelic revelation or from the tortured cry of the demon in his terror, one way or the other, both emphasize Jesus is the Holy One of God come among us. That the holy, holy, holy second person of the Trinity came and dwelled among us so that we could be saved and so that our unholiness could be done away with and we could be brought back to a relationship with the holy God, the Holy One who comes and redeems his people. So, big concept holiness, and we will continue at least one more Tea-ology to dwell upon it. But in the meantime, may God bless you, and may He fill you with wonder and give you just the tiniest grasp of His great holiness as you go through your day and through your week. And of course, enjoy your tea.